well, we ran a few off last week, or they're busy downstairs talking, and it was a sizable group that was here for last Sunday. But we're going to plow through a lot of stuff today. I've got a lot of scripture to go through, some really good examples of, like, there's so many in the scripture regarding crisis of faith. I mean, I could have just picked David. And, David had, like us, has a lot of self-inflicted wounds. He did a lot to himself in there, but he also had periods of time where he, was when he's hiding in the caves from Saul, and yet he had that calling, right, in 1 Kings chapter 16. And I love that story only because David had this anointing, right? And he truly did. Like some people, I had your Foursquare Pentecostal guys. One of them was a roommate for a period of time, and he used to always look at me and says, Tim, he said, that dude's anointed. There's always certain language that they use. And I never saw that sort of, now with the prophet coming, to David's house, he truly took oil and anointed. So that dude was anointed. And he had a call, and yet he spent, a long period of time just running from Saul. And it just, if I can't think of any deeper form of having a crisis of faith, to know that you have a call, and yet you're under fire for all that period of time. And I was reminded this morning coming in, I was listening to Moody, and they had a pastor from the Geist Christian Church. And it was already in my head. Actually, had John 16:33 in my head this morning as I was driving here. But the part where Jesus just, he came and he kept his eyes on the Father, because he had that one period of time where he says, Lord, if you can take this cup from me, right, in the garden, if you just take it. And yet that obedience under the fire of trials, even he showed us that there can be a crisis. That was like one, it's not sinful. That was the human side of him that looked up at the Father and said, is there another way to do this? Does that make sense? And that's powerful, because it shows in our humanity that, he promised us in John 16:33 that in this world you shall have tribulation, you shall have trials. And then he lived it out, because he lived as a suffering Savior. And he then, as he goes into Matthew, I think it's Matthew chapter 24, and begins to coach the disciples. He says, don't worry about what you're going to say when these things are all coming down on you, because he said, I will give you the words to say. So, when I look at that and I think it through, he prepared them. He said, you're going to go among like sheep going to slaughter. And we mentioned the whole Emperor's New Groove last week, right? Sharp rocks, water down below, bring it on. And I really don't think, a lot of believers really ever have that in their mind as the onset of tribulation happened and the news comes in, right? But it's like we're promised that. And then yet we have churches all around the country, coast to coast, that tell us that, trials equate to sin. If you're not really living in abundance and have all the protection, then you must have sin in your life. Well, that's a completely upside down teaching. And they make it sound like, if you're a super believer, otherwise you need to start digging through your drawers and looking for where you're hiding your sin in there. In fact, it's gone as far as even kids like Ezra and other disabled kids in some circles, they'll tell you, well, that's the sin of the parents, or the sin of something, and I know firsthand that happens a lot. They look at brokenness and think, well, that's sin. What is it? And somebody from an elder or somebody will come over and say, well, you need to confess this sin. This happened to you because of that. And so there's so much, twisted information of doctrine. We mentioned a little bit about, as we got into Hebrews chapter 3 last week, is another thing about this challenge of, can you walk away? And, a lot of people will get really upside down on that topic. And I'm like, you have nothing to get upside down on. We can completely disagree. I'm just going to tell you that's what Scripture says. It's not my opinion. It's not my opinion. It doesn't matter what Tim thinks or what anybody thinks, Chuck Mitzler or anybody. It doesn't matter what we think. It's what does it say? And you can always substantiate. If it only says it once, well, then you don't stand on it. But when something is repeated more than once, and you find the author, especially Paul and even Jesus, and we're going to look at a couple of these this morning, but even talking about this subject. But the fact that it's real, then it's like, okay, I don't want to be that guy, or I don't want to be that woman. I want to get it. And as you look at my closer down here, it's enduring unto the end. Enduring unto the end of all of it. So I skipped over one little thing I want to bring up. This part about faith, that faith is anxiety killer. You guys saw that bullet point on your sheets? And I skipped over it last week because I got rolling right into the next section. But I want to just to kind of address that for a couple minutes here. In 1985, this song by Huey Lewis hit number 6 on the charts and went multi-platinum. Huey Lewis, here's the words to his song. Song was, "I Want a New Drug." And the lyrics go like this. It says, "I want a new drug, one that won't make me sick, one that won't make me crash my car or make me feel 3 feet thick. I want a new drug, one that won't hurt my head, one that won't make my mouth too dry or my eyes too red, one that won't make me nervous, wondering what to do, one that makes me feel like I feel when I'm with you, when I'm alone with you." So he's kind of taking a twist to a love song. And then he goes on to say, "I want a new drug, one that won't spill, one that won't cost too much or come in a pill. I want a new drug, that one that won't go away, one that won't keep me up all night, one that won't make me sleep all day, one that won't make me nervous, wondering what to do, one that makes me feel like I'm with you." So you're probably asking yourself, like, why are you bringing it up, this part of it? Well, in our world today, tribulation and trials are typically treated with medication. So I went on WebMD and I want to get an idea of some statistics. And there was so much out there I had to quickly sift through. But you have to get to the facts right here. So in our country right now, this is I can say this is data that they took over a year period, that in college campuses, anxiety in the areas of health and their ability to assist students, right? And the students come, they go into their the counseling or into the clinical offices. They said the number one thing that students had was anxiety. Number 2 was depression. So when you think of that, so there's a list. So I jumped over to WebMD, and there's a lot of ways that they deal with this, right? With anxiety. They've now opened up the whole Pandora's box of LSD. So that is a whole new thing that they've brought back in. They outlawed it, they banned it, and now it's come back in clinical LSD to help people reset.
I actually have an article down in my bag
Mm-hmm.
using all of these psycho
Yeah.
drugs, but they are saying that the problem is that you can't control what's going to happen, but somehow it rewires your brain
Mm-hmm.
so that you can, if you have PTSD,
Yeah.
finding it helps with that. But how can you give it something like that to somebody if it's going to give you a bad trip and all this other stuff too?
Yeah, they administer it. So if you read about it, you'll find out they administer it. You normally have a person there that is there for observation through the whole thing and to try to prevent you from having a bad trip. But there's this aspect where there are chemical imbalances. I'm not going to be one, and for the record, I believe there are chemical imbalances in bodies. I know that as watching my wife go through the first pregnancy, I'm like, who is this woman? This is not the woman I married, and then coming through postpartum, I'm like, okay, and then, going into menopause, I'm like, who is this woman? I'm like, chemistry has a bearing on changing how our body uses chemicals for all kinds of things, for smell. And if you go into the whole part of neuropathy, or not neuropathy, but neurology, you can find that, chemicals are all part of what God used. So could there be an imbalance? I'm like, absolutely. It sounds like if Satan wanted to attack an area, let's attack the body chemically if there's a way we can do it. But the statistics also show that so much of it is how we process and how we deal with the trials and tribulations that come into our lives. So one of the questions I kind of posed is like, so what is the primary cause of anxiety? If you were a panel, What are some of the primary causes of anxiety in life? Just the biggies. That what's that? Absolutely unknown. That's in my top 5. What else?
Sometimes the known.
Yeah. Knowing what's coming, Jesus at the cross.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says that he had so much, if you want to call it anxiety, that it says that they had drops of blood coming out of his pores. So, I mean, that's probably pretty much hypertension or something going on. I'm no doctor, but I would say that that is an extreme of stress that the body's reacting, right?
I had just spoke with someone and I was telling them that about fear. And the word of God says that he's given us power, love, and a sound mind.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have the power, if you don't have the love, and you don't have the sound mind, maybe you're walking in fear.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think fear is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So keep going. Anybody else got something else?
That would stem from unbelief, right?
Absolutely. That's where we're going with all this. Good. Mm-hmm. Well, and that comes right into where I'm kind of heading with this, because Jesus said, what? My yoke is easy and my burden is light. And so there's this part about it that in faith, as we bring things to the Lord, that the Lord he helps us, or he strengthens us. Supernaturally, he gives us coping mechanisms, right? So all this, because I don't want to spend too much time, because I got a lot of scriptures, but the big one, my number 1 was fear. Number 2, the unknown. These are just mine, personal ones, so there's a lot more. Social rejection in relationships, and trying to control the outcomes of everything, right? Playing God, right? Those are the biggies. So that's Tim's. So let's look at what WebMD and this PhD that wrote. Stress from work, stress from school, stress from personal relationships, financial stress, stress from global occurrences, and political issues. It's kind of funny because they actually have all this counseling going on because of the presidential election for those that didn't win, because their life now needs all kinds of anxiety drugs and all kinds of stuff, right? Because they didn't get the outcome. And so here, it's funny, they list this.
Just they get the outcome, the fear of what they think they know that's unknown.
Right. Right. Well, and plus, like I said before, when we started this series, it doesn't matter who wins, because God's got it as a believer. Even though it matters to us, it does, but it really doesn't matter. Because he used, like I said, he used Belshazzar, right? He used Nebuchadnezzar. He used Cyrus. You can go all down the list. He used Pharaoh. I mean, God uses pagan, really nasty kings to do his work. And so you have to give it back to him. Say, if you did it then, why wouldn't you still do it today, right? Stress from emotional trauma, like death of a loved one, stress of serious medical issues, right? So those are their top ones. But here's the remedies, right? This is where it gets good. Number 1, they say exercise, which I would give that a kudos. But it's not, that's not what, as a Christian, I would say number 1 is. Number 2 is, this is funny, meditation. So I'm like, it's kind of like you're going to get ready to encounter this, and I want to kind of give you a little bit set up for Thanksgiving. So many of the lost people you hang around say, we have so much to be thankful for, and they're unbelievers, and they're like, but what's the object of the gratitude? You're like, because it's a really good opportunity that you have to talk to them. Say, well, I'm really glad because God wants us to have a gracious, thankful heart. But what is the object of that? It's kind of like we mentioned last time, the series of our faith, when you say, well, you can get through this, God, you have an unbeliever trying to coach you in a medical diagnosis like you got cancer. And they're like, you know what, just have faith. You're going to get through this, the whole thing. And you're like, well, first of all, faith in what? What is the object of your faith? Right? So in meditation, what's the object of your meditation? And in Thanksgiving, well, as you start having family members that you are not believers, say, well, what is the object of your thankfulness? It's kind of, because I think it comes from within that we have gratitude, but it's, who is it you're grateful to? Is it some cosmic, whatever gas or entity or universe? What is it that you're grateful for? And how are you going to direct this gratitude? And you'll hear it by sports commentator. Oh, watching football. Who watches football in here? Anybody? I watch a lot of football, and Thanksgiving we'll watch both games, and my whole family's like that. But it's like, hear those commentators in the booth just talk about, we have so much to be thankful for and all this, and they're right. But they don't give you any direction at all on that, and even the pause and let's have a moment of silence for something. And it's like, well, what are you directing the silence to? Is it just dead air? I mean, you have to have an object. It's all those things to me are like, they're byproducts from the DNA within us that says there is a God. Even though everything the person says is there's not. Well, there is, because our natural instinct is to call upon this higher being that created us. It's right down to our DNA. So these things, so here they have do relaxation exercises. How can I prevent it? Visualization into what? Good sleep habits. Well, I'd move that up to number 2. Everybody has more anxiety when they don't have a good night's sleep, right? And that's a healthy diet. And then their last one, learn interpersonal skills for dealing with difficult people and difficult situations. And if you have children, get parenting skills training to help you deal with this type of anxiety. So of all these things, but here's the interesting thing. When you look at all this, and this is worthy to go through and obviously look at, but it's the part that having faith and understanding that God's got all in control solves all these. It's number 1. It doesn't even make the list. According to the medical industry, it doesn't even make the list. And then if I actually ran the stats, and I'll skip over it for time, but they have the whole industry on the medicating this. Okay, so most all these things we just read are what do they all have in common? It's life. Every single thing that they listed on there is what a daily get out of bed. And if you stay in your house and never leave, you won't encounter a lot of those things, but just life. So what the industry is doing, and I guess I'll give the stat. I mean, the amount of prescriptions going out for anxiety, and they list the primary ones that are in here, but the amount that are going out is over 160,000 students were clinically recognized as having to be medicated on the universities. And just unbelievable. They said the numbers were up, considerably. 2 out of 5 said that they were depressed and they struggled to function. 3 out of 5 said their anxiety is overwhelming. Okay, and this study was taken, by the way, 2016 and 17. You might think I'm quoting COVID years, but I'm not. So these are kids that have been raised up most likely in houses that aren't faith-based. They don't have an object that's real, and they're trying to deal with everything life has and saying that they have to shoulder all this, right? And so when I say faith is an anxiety killer, it is. And again, I'm not taking away that some people don't have medical conditions, and this goes on to a whole myriad of things, from being diagnosed with bipolar disease and the amount that are doing it, and then the drug sales right here. It says drug sales went up in 2023, 17.3% of the drugs that were actually prescribed were anti-anxiety drugs, 17.3%, and then it lists all the ones that are prescribed. So when Huey Lewis coined those words back in 1985, I want a new drug, I mean, that's exactly, there's a drug for everything. And as a pastor, teacher, and I remember going way back, 15, 20 years ago, having a young lady come up and say, you know what, I'm bipolar, I'm on all these medications, and I had taught something, I don't remember what it was. And I guess it challenged her whether or not what she was taking really is necessary. Or is it just life that she's dealing with that is overwhelming? And it is. I mean, but that's life. And, as parents, we have to be the ones that say, we kind of set a role on how we do it. But it's important that, especially if you have the opportunity and to be a believer and raise the kids, to say, this is life. You go through a bad church experience. I've been through one. And I'll tell you what, that it can do a lot of things to you. It can push you away from church, which is exactly what the devil wants. He wants to separate you from other believers because we really, like Paul said, how does the hand say to the eye, I don't need you, I'll get by without you? It doesn't work that way. You know, if one thing we have is like, what are we here to give, not what are we here to take? Right? What is it getting to us? I get so tired of hearing that when people get disgruntled with me and with the church. Say, well, I just am not learning anything new. I'm not going to go. I can get teaching from Charles Stanley on the radio or whatever it is on the, on the web and all that stuff and pay no attention. They don't understand that they are communicating they're takers. They're not givers. And you've got to say, well, you're there to maybe help somebody sitting next to you. Somebody that just walked in the door, somebody that, I was always taught there's always a Paul and a Timothy, right? So I've walked with the Lord 40 years, and I don't know how long all of you, have, but we're a Paul. If you've been, 5-10 years in ministry and you're spending time in prayer and in the Word, you're a Paul. You should be able to help lead and guide, and especially when ministry and home group is all about the stressful things. That's what it's supposed to be. We teach, and then this family's going through a daughter or a son that has gone off the deep end, and that comes up for prayer, right? And myopically, you come together and begin to pray, But all these things are part of what we're told. It's the walk. I always say, lead somebody to Christ. One of the first things you say is what I told Kristen is you got a big target on your back, and so do all your kids. We got to really pray. We got to change the way we're praying. And look, because, that's the reality of stepping into higher roles and higher visibility, where it once was just your house or just your workplace. And then when you step in full-time ministry, now it's all of this. People watch you. And this part about it. But, anybody that's a believer understands anxiety and the stresses and how quickly we can shed it. And if we get caught up where we get bogged down in the mud or the weeds, however you want to put it, that's where you lean on somebody that knows you, and then they help pull you out to say, look, brother, I get it. It's overwhelming. I'm here to try to help you and help shelter this and truly to say, God's going to help get you through this. I don't know all the answers but you're like, but the finances but whatever it is, I just, and that's what the church is here for. So those loners miss all of it. When you say, and then, what are you there to give and not to take? So we're jumping back into the series, Jeremiah 12. Let's look really right back here. Jeremiah 12, crisis of faith. Love this. And, it's funny, as I note scripture, as I go through, I always date passages, and it's just like, I came back to this when I'm like, I don't remember reading this before. And you're like, am I the only one like that? And then you're digging out all these nuggets and you're like, wow, this is a gold mine for this series. But here we got Jeremiah chapter 12 here, and he says, righteous are you, O Lord, that I would, look at this, I would plead my case with you. Much like we read Ecclesiastes 7 last week, as Solomon just talked about how the wicked prosper right along with the good, right? The rain falls on the just and the unjust. So here he's like, can I plead my case with you? And God is gracious. He said, well, God's like, of course you can, And indeed, I would discuss the matter of justice with you. Why has the way of the wicked prospered? And, figuratively saying you can kind of pull on the beard and well, you're going to want to hear this answer, right? How God uses it. Why are all those who deal in treachery at ease? And then he just points out, he's like, Lord, you've planted them, and they have taken root. They grow. They even have produced fruit. You are near to their lips, but far from their mind. When you watch the election, a lot of the politicians and stuff going on, that verse has teeth. They bring up God's name whenever it works for them, right? And then in the next breath, they talk about standing for abortion on any cause, even up to the 9th month. You're like, that's just wicked. And then the whole rally cry and everybody's jumping in the room, yes! And you're like, I saw that on the video of what's her name's rally. And I'm like, that really just happened? They jumped out in complete accolades. And it was just, when you kind of step back, I'm like, how do you get there? Even as a non-believer, how do you get there? And to get, only Satan can be that crafty, to be able to do this in the hearts of people. It says, but you know me, O Lord, you see me, and you examine my heart and attitude towards you. Drag them off like sheep for the slaughter and set them apart for the day of carnage. Isn't that where we land a lot of times? And, that's just crying out because we know that we know. When I went through the book of Amos, one of the biggest things, if you've never studied the book, is the first 5 or 6 chapters are all about, it's all about injustice. In fact, God goes through, I think it's chapters 2 and 3, and calls out all the communities around there in Israel on what they're doing exactly. It's the indictments against them. And then he says, and for each one, he tells what it was like because they were full of injustice and they were slaughtering their kids. They were doing all these things, in total injustice. And God says, I'm a God of justice. And the thing is, I had a conversation Saturday night with a good friend, and we were telling him a situation we had to walk through, and he got all upright and said, you know what? Well, I know people, we can get that remedied. And he was serious. And I'm like, you know what? No, you don't have to do that from this situation because the God I serve is big. He's not a little one, he's big. And his justice grinds slow, but it grinds. He'll take care of it. I can rest on that. And so we don't always get to see how God is using it. But this part, a lot of times we are that. That was him. He's like, you know what? I'll deal with this. I'll take care of this situation. But it says, how long is the land to mourn and the vegetation on the countryside to wither for the wickedness of those who dwell in it? And animals and birds have been snatched away because men have said he will not see our latter ending. And people that, we're not always here to see how it's all going to play out. And that's okay. That's part of the anti-anxiety drug. God's just like, don't worry about it. The system failed. How many times we hear that? The justice system failed. And how many movies have you watched like that? There's one of them that was back. It was Michael, Michael Douglas was in this movie. It was called The Star Chamber. And The Star Chamber shows in this movie, and I'm not endorsing it, but it's a great movie when it comes to the fact of injustice and guys that get off the hook. And so the whole premise of the movie where the judges got sick of, these really high judges got sick of having to release all these criminals because of technicalities in our legal system, right? And, was it what they call it, the Miranda, what do they call it, Miranda's? What do they call it, where you read them the rights or whatever? Mirandize. Yeah, and just little technicalities and people get off. So they formed a whole group that meets privately, and they're going, they got hitmen. They got the best ones in the world working for them. And their job is they all re-listen they each one bring a case every time they meet, and they all listen as judges to the case, and then they decide what are we going to do? Is it guilty, meaning it's going to be a death penalty? We're going to put the hitman on him or not? And they go through all that. Well, in this twist of things, he gets one of them wrong. And he figures it out, and he's trying to stop it. And the justices they said, that can't happen. It's not a perfect system. And it's really gripping because he does everything he can do to save these thugs that are really nasty people. And I kind of equate it, it's kind of like us. And it's really powerful because you don't see it coming in the movie, and then it comes and you're like, wow. Because a lot of, they were like, you know what, these are kind of like the other judges, kind of like, these are just total wastoids anyway. What's the point? Well, that's kind of like us when God finds us and cleans us up, and takes us like, we're all guilty, and he does it in spite of it. And he's the ultimate judge, right? So Jeremiah wrestles with it. Let's go to Judges chapter 6. We'll plow quicker. I won't get through all these examples, but I'll leave them for you that you could be able to go into some of these. Okay, Judges chapter 6, we find Gideon. And I'll kind of give you a quick brief. In the first, 10 verses in here, basically, the Lord comes to visit Gideon. And the Midianites have been oppressing them, the Israelites, and they've brought along with them the Amalekites. And in verse 5, it says basically when they came into the land to devastate it. That's the end of verse 5. And they basically, if you look at verse 4, you mentioned they destroyed the produce of the earth as far as Gaza. Tells you how long that area has been around, right? To leave no substance in Israel, as well as sheep, ox, or donkeys. So they were coming in and destroying them economically. That's trials, baby. We see that in the globe right now taking place. But war is probably one of the worst trials. And, if you were in Kiev right now and watching this grind into, second year or maybe even into the third year, I mean, when you see everything around you continually being destroyed, and you never know if you're next, I mean, that's anxiety. Right now, they're saying that the conversion rate in Ukraine is off the chain of people that are coming to the Lord. He uses this stuff. It wakes us up. So here, the Lord ends up meeting it. He sends this prophet in verse 8 to the sons of Israel, and the Lord is speaking to them, right? And he says, thus says the Lord, it wasn't I that brought you out of Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of all your oppressors and dispossessed them. I almost want to say disposed of them, but that's not what it says. Dispossessed them and you before you and gave you, Israel, their land, and said to you, I am the Lord your God, and do not fear the gods, the little g, right? There are a lot of other gods, by the way. The little gods are fallen angels. I always say you need to look up the root of that word. It's Elohim. It's the same that we use, except for this little g. I don't know how that works in Hebrew, but I do know that they are created beings that have been given powers, and they're the bad dogs that come out to deceive the world. They're alive. So when they use these words to follow other little gods, I used to think they're just little idols. No, they really are divinely created beings. They're not sons of Adam. Sons of Adam we came through Adam. These were created direct creations of God, and they're out there. In fact, Revelation tells us there's a place called Tartarus, and the really bad dogs are there. And they've been let out, and they're going to get let out again, it tells us, at the end of time. And these are the ones that cause the most of the destruction. But to this day, understanding when Paul says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces, you don't understand the depth of that if you don't understand the truth of this statement, that there are other gods that you can choose, and they all tout the same thing, the same fingerprints. That's why the world repeats the same things all over again, because they're constantly coming and whispering into the ears of mankind to derail them and to get people to worship them and what they stand for, hence the abortion god, and hence the god of flesh, of sexuality, gratifications and momentary time, things and all this stuff. It all proves the fact that it all does exist, but he's like, don't go after them, right? I showed you that I exist. And then, so verse 11, it says, then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak tree that was in Orpha, or however you say that, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. So the picture of a winepress is always down low. The actual area where wheat is threshed is always up high, where the wind can catch the chaff and blow it away. So now he's down hiding. I mean, they're all trying to save whatever little bit of food they have. And again, it's complete economic ruin. That adds an enormous amount of stress to any culture, any person. And the angel appeared to him and said, the Lord is with you, O valiant warrior, which is really a spin on things. But God is almost like telling him, I know your future, right? And Gideon said to him, and this is the crisis of faith part, oh my Lord, if the Lord is with us, right? Is this right down to the core? Why has all this happened to us? This is the God of prosperity type of statement. If you got a God that is only prosperity, you're going to say, well, we're under all this. What do you mean you're with us, right? That's the Garden of Gethsemane, right? And this is where Christians find themselves in the valley, right? And here Gideon is being honest with the Lord. Why is all this? And where are all his miracles? and it says, excuse me, which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? He's repeating what he was just told in the preceding verses. But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of the Midianites, and in this case, and the Amalekites. And the Lord looked at him and said, go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? And now he says to him, O Lord, then how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest of my father's house. But the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. And then Gideon goes on, and the verses coming up, and just says, you know what? I want to know that it's you. And he begins to actually make a kind of like a sacrifice, if you will. He's going to feed this angel of the Lord, which we think is a pre-incarnation of Christ, because the angel doesn't eat it. It says he puts it on the rock and it just evaporates. It's kind of like Nadab and Abihu. It's just gone. But he wants confirmation. And here you have an encounter, and I'll mirror that with the one we don't have time to get into, but Moses when he meets the Lord at the burning bush, right? So he's been 40 years in the wilderness, and the Lord decides, okay, your time of thinking about doing things your way is over. That was, I'll kill the Egyptian, right? And I'll do it my way, Lord. And so he says that all that's through. And so the Lord begins to talk to him about how he's going to use him. And what you find if you go into that section of Scripture is there's this argument back and forth. Moses is just like Gideon. I mean, these two parallel, and you have this supernatural event taking place. Here you have a supernatural event taking place, which is what all of us want as a believer. Because we're like, if we had one of those dealies, man, I'd be like on fire for the rest of my days. And I'm like, no, we just read Hebrews chapter 3 about the wilderness. Did they not see all the miracles in Egypt? And yet none of them entered into the promised land because of unbelief. And the writer of Hebrews says it, and this is where I wanted to really land longer on. If I had one more series, we would have gone more into his rest. Because chapter 4 of Hebrews is all about entering into God's rest. So just the opposite of these anxiety drugs and all this stuff is the fact that God says, no, you can find rest in the midst of it. And we went to, into 1 Peter and James, and where this part where it talks about that there's joy in the midst of the trials, and that the tribulations come to test our faith. So when you find yourself in the midst of the depth of these trials, the Midianites and the Amalek war, we'll just put it that way, war on your land, know that God's doing it and he's got a purpose. Find a joy, find a peace and a comfort, and that can only come from one thing, that's him. And the whole thing about drugging our culture, unbelievable. And I have no idea what the real numbers are of these kids and adults that are being medicated when really it's all big pharma, and I hate to use that word, but it's all just to sell drugs. 17% of the drugs on the market, that's close to 20, 17.3. Of course they're going to prescribe it. Oh, Lord, let's just even out the highs and even out the lows. And you know how it always works. We'll just make you even. We'll just...
With 6% of the world's population, we consume 50% of all pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, this is a challenge for those that are on it. That's the goal, I'm only limited to you guys here, but if anybody watches it via the recording, but it's like reality is, my wife would always say, there's certain things you go to the doctor and yeah, that one makes sense, but they prescribe a lot. And she's like, you got to be careful. Everybody now is diabetic, and we talked about this. It's like pre-diabetic. And I'm like, since when is all this? It's like everything. Yeah, we have a lot of crappy food in our culture. And we have way too much sugar in our diet. Yeah, I get all that. And that's contributing. But a lot of times it's dietary changes and exercise. There's things that we can do. And Kim and I talked about this a little bit. And I'm not saying you have to take medicine. If you're over the line, some cases you probably should. I had a good friend that died. His name was John Brown. And some of you may know who John Brown, but he died from diabetes from not treating it. He tried holistic stuff, and God bless him. He went through it, but it finally got to him, ate his organs, and he died. He died in his bed. It's going back about 5 years ago. John was a dear friend. I've known John, knew him for 20 some years. And I applauded that he tried to do it a certain way, but sometimes, you probably should have. And they were right on this side of it. He couldn't get control of it. He had lost the weight, but the methods in which he used his body and something about how all that works. And I'm not a doctor. So I just know that there are some that are just way beyond where they should be. And we have to walk that line individually and make a decision. Is this something that I can do? Something the Lord's telling me? Or is this something I really do need to listen to the physician, right? In the midst of it. But, Moses argues with God, and then we know the other side of that is then he says, well, just choose Aaron. I'm just not a good speaker. And then we talked about that, last time. We know how well that worked out. The golden calf was right out on the other side of that. And, you can just go down the whole list. I mean, Aaron was not an exemplary guy, and it shows the failure in the very first Levitical, or he wasn't Levitical priest. He was the very first chosen priest. The Levitical order would take over after the killing of those that rebelled. And the Levites cut them all down. And God says, hey, I can use those guys. I'll make them priests because they stand for righteousness. And you can look that up for yourselves in there. But and the other one, I love this one. So Abraham, everybody loves Father Abraham, right? And so what do we find in Genesis chapter 12? Abraham gets the call. You're going to go to this land, and where, and I'm going to take you to this place, right? It's kind of like heading toward the promised land. I'm going to make a nation out of you, all these promises. And within the same chapter, would you guys know where I'm going with this? You find that he's traveling, they're on the road again, just can't wait to get on the road again. Oh, my music and my friends. And they get there, and he's like, oh, when we get here, you're beautiful, my wife, and I just want you to know this is going to play out this way. You're going to be my sister. And here we find another supernatural encounter, with the Lord that happens before the Exodus. And here we've got this scenario where Pharaoh gets a vision and a dream and says, wait a minute, you lied to me. You're going to bring calamity onto me and my leadership or our country by lying to me. So immediately, we'll say moral failure, whatever. I'm going to say it's faith failure. He's like, he has enough faith to pack up everything he owns. It says, take everything, all your people, everything you own, drag it along with you. I don't care. And yet we immediately find failure in a crisis. The first crisis that comes in Abraham's life is his choice of a wife. And we find out that it happens again. And then it happens with his son. He has the same issue. And he does the same thing. He lies about it. And these are all, when I kind of opened up, the first one was about, they're not all Goliath things, Goliath type of things. Sometimes they're all just small things. These are actually quite small in my eyes. You're like, this is my wife, and I'll trust that the Lord will protect that relationship, and I'll do my best to protect it. But those were like small moves of faith that are complete failures. So crisis of faith happens sometimes right out of the gate as new believers, but it really comes in, like I mentioned, the screw tape letters, as we walk it out. Because once we build a following of watchers, that's when Satan wants to take us down. He wants moral failure. He wants stuff that is going to come out. And there are pastors in the Calvary Chapel. Unfortunately, Bob Coy was one of those. Man, that was a big one. When he went down, that devastated so many people. That looked to the man, and he was had one of the biggest churches in America at that time. I think he was 20,000, some ridiculous numbers of that. But his moral failure and just he decided he could have sexual encounters whenever he wanted them, and tried to hide it. And in fact, I talked to one of the staffers that was a worship leader on staff, and he said everybody saw it. And he said what he did was they just had a rotating staff. As soon as you touched it, they got rid of you. And he was one of them. He came to Indianapolis and began to lead worship up here and married a gal. You can only hide so many things. God's going to reveal the sin, especially at the top of the thing. But I'll tell you what, I've seen him once since then, and it's really bad. To see what condition. Last time I saw him, he came here a while back ago. But Bob's not the guy. My kids love Bob Coy. He came to the pastor's conference a couple times, and they loved the way he taught. Everybody did. Just a funny guy. But it's like, but he got into the Calvary Chapel movement. He got in that high position, and then the devil set him up. And he really thought he was untouchable. And God's like, and it'll do it to us. We have to pray that he does it to us if we ever get there. Bring me down, Lord. You know what? If I get uppity, bring me down. Bring me down. Enduring till the end, right? So we're going to jump over Matthew 24. Let's just plow through real quick, and we're not going to get through all these. Matthew 24. This is that encouraging speech. Jesus talking to us, talking to the disciples. He's sitting there on the Mount of Olives, and the apostles say, what will be the sign of your coming? And Jesus says to them, see that no one misleads you, right? So the goal of Screw Tape Letters was that you're going to try to be misled. You're going to try to be derailed. You're going to try to be set, 0.1 or 2 degrees off your course. Many will come in my name saying I'm the Christ, and what? They will mislead many. So that means these are people who look, smell, and taste like Christians. They come into the midst of your life. They're into your home, into the church, whatever it is. And it says, and you will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars, and see that you're not frightened, for these things must take place. But it's not yet the end, for nation rises against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs, and they will deliver you to tribulation. So he's talking to us, right, to believers. He's talking to the disciples or the apostles, and it says and they will kill you, and you will be hated. Is this a great pep talk? You'll be hated by all nations because of my name. And then here's that verse that dovetails into Hebrews 3. And at that time, many, circle it, underline it, many will what? Fall away. Well, you can't fall away from something you don't have. I've always said it. You can't go back on that one and say, well, they never had it. Well, you can't fall away from something you don't have. So this is Jesus. This isn't Tim. This isn't the writer of Hebrews. This is Jesus teaching. Many, not some, not a few, many will fall away and betray one another, and false prophets will arise. This is the days that are ahead of us, folks. We might be just starting in these. And they will mislead many. Because of the lawlessness is increased, people's love will grow cold. But look at this verse 13. But what? Circle this, underline it. But the one who endures. These aren't Tim's words. Endures to the end. He will be what? Saved. And then here's the goal. The gospel is supposed to go out, right? It shall be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. 1 Timothy 4:1. So jump back a little bit there. 1 Timothy 4:1. We'll just quickly read these. Key verses. 1 Timothy 4:1. But the Spirit explicitly, I don't know, what does yours have explicitly in there if you get there? What does it say? Distinctly, any other? Explicitly, expressly, what does he say? He declares that in the latter times, some will fall away from what? The faith. Pay attention. What does he say? Why? Because deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons come in. That's what Paul says. Put on the whole armor. There's a battle in both heavenly places, says, and it mirrors what's happening in heaven. We don't get into that whole part of doctrine and teaching and all that, but it says there's wars in heaven. God allows, we know Job chapter 1, he allows Satan to come into his very presence. That tweaks our brain, and he allows Satan to bid on people. So you got to deal with, you don't like that, that's okay. You got to deal with those verses, right? Matthew, we're going to skip through some stuff because we're running short on time. Matthew chapter 10, 16 to 22. Let's hit that one. Just jump around real quick, please. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be shrewd as serpents, innocent as doves. But beware of men that will hand you over to the courts and scourge you in their synagogues, and they will They will even be brought to before governors for my sake as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles, to us. But when they hand you over, don't worry about what you're going to say, right? It'll be given to you. I already repeated this one. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit speaks through you. So he's going to help us when we get it, when it's really bad. In Revelation, we won't turn to that one. Revelation chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 is the closing of the summation of the judgments against the churches. And I think it's like maybe 4 out of 7 or 5 out of 7. It says, I know your deeds. And for those that says works never matter, well, you got to also take that up with Jesus, because he's grading them by what they're doing. He says, I know your deeds, right? And he gets through the latter part here, and after he addresses them, actually, you know what? I do have to go there because I want you to see this verse. So just go quickly, Revelation 3. And again, all 7 churches have been spoken to. Doesn't matter what I think, I want you to see the word. But he who what? Verse 5. Overcomes. This is the overcomer verses. You have the fall away verses, and then you have the overcomer verses. Then you have the verses that talk about finish the race. But here, he who overcomes will be clothed in white garments. And this is the kicker. I will not erase his name from the book of life. Now, I come from the platform, and I stand in the company of a lot of people. I believe every name of every person born on earth has been written in the Lamb's book of life. And you have from that time until you breathe your last to accept Christ. At the moment that you have breathed your last, your name is erased if you haven't taken it. So this is a very similar verse. So it's you don't have to subscribe to that. I could substantiate it in certain ways, but I believe everybody has. That's why it says it's God's heart that all are saved. His goal is it's kind of like that book in Elf where he's got Santa's book and he's got the naughty ones. It's like he sees Walter Hobbs. No! That's his dad, He's in the naughty list. In the book of life, it's like, these are all my kids that were born in the image of God. All mankind was born in the image of God. I was always challenged with that. It's like, be careful how you deal with certain things and certain people, because we can get really angry with people that are really vigilant about, horrible things. But, there's one pastor, I think it was probably Chuck Swindoll, said, just always remember, they too are made in the image of God. Respect them. Even though you disagree with them, how you handle the situation is everything. That whole part about, and watching people that can do that a lot better than me is really challenging. And dealing with really, dirty, nasty situations in people's lives and be able to do it in such a way to be peaceful and graceful. But it says that, he who has an ear, let him hear, right? I will confess his name before this Father, and he who has let him hear what the Spirit says to the church, right? And 2 John 1, 5-8 just talks about a section that we can begin to go backwards in our faith, and it talks about rewards. And we won't go there because of time, and we're going to close it out. In 2 Timothy, Paul encourages us to preach the word throughout the seasons of life. And we're going to close with these verses. So get to 2 Timothy 4, and it's our final stop. Some of you, I'll step out of the series for one other minute because Alistair Begg has copied me on this for so many years because I always use music in my head and movies to illustrate stuff. There was a Canadian rock band back in the 80s, 1985. And as a new believer, walking probably 10, 15 years with the Lord, this song came into my head during a worship, when I used to lead worship. And I remember as the lyrics started rolling through my head, I'm like, Rick Emmett must have grown up in the church. That's the lead singer for Triumph. Everybody knew who Triumph was? Canadian, great band back in the days. They had 3 songs in 1985 that went double platinum, made number 6 on the charts. This one is right out of here, right out of Paul's writings. It's called Fight the Good Fight. Now listen to these words. They're not scripture, but they get the essence of what we're about to read, because I know that he had this verse in mind when he wrote these lyrics. The days, somebody just said this morning, the days grow shorter and the nights are getting long. Feels like we're running out of time. Every day it seems much harder telling right from wrong. You've got to read between the lines. Sound like we're living this today? Don't get discouraged. Don't be afraid. We can make it through another day. Make it worth the price that we pay. The good book says it's better to give than to receive. I do the best to do my part. There's nothing in my pockets and there's nothing up my sleeve. And he says, I keep the magic in my heart. So you can take that. But it says, keep up your spirit, keep up your faith. I'm counting on you. You know what you have to do. Fight the good fight. And this is where I close in here. Fight the good fight every moment, every minute, every day. Fight the good fight every moment. It's your only way. Are those pretty amazing verses from the band Triumph? And so when we close out this whole series, he says, I solemnly take charge over you, 2 Timothy 4, verse 1, in the presence of God, and this is kind of like our benediction, to judge the living and the dead by his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word. That's what we're told to do. Be ready in season and out of season. Things that we do with our kids and families and people that we love, we reprove, rebuke, and exhort. With what? Great patience. Great patience. And instruction. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. He's saying that in the first century church, right? How much does that apply? It's nothing new under the sun. But wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires. They will turn away their ears from the truth, and they will turn aside the myths. Be sober in all things. And look at this, it's pep talk in the locker room. Endure hardship. Right? We beat this all over the place in the 4 sessions. We have to endure. This is getting to the end. Endure to the end. Right? Do the work of the evangelist and fulfill your ministry. And we all have one. You know, our ministry is all similar, but it's all different. It's our sphere of influence. And it's like a great locker room speech, halftime, whatever, into the game under a great loss, whatever you want to say, however you want to apply that. But, I mean, we all have a ministry, and he tells us to our very last breath to keep fighting, fight the good fight, right? Put on the whole armor of God and get to the end of this race. And then Screw Tape Letters tell us they're out after you, man. Their goal is to get you in any way they can. So we'll close with that, and I think you normally close us out in prayer.